It's Tuesday morning, August 10th. Thanks for downloading or live streaming Real Talk. Ryan Jesperson here with you alongside Sarah Hoyle, Samuel Brooks. This episode is presented by our title sponsor, the team at Bitcoin Well, now officially the world's first publicly traded Bitcoin ATM company. Huge congratulations to them. The year will continue to get bigger and bigger in the context of this business's growth when they move to a fancy new location. What you need to know right now as crypto becomes more and more relevant, maybe not to you personally yet, or maybe it's a huge deal to you. Either way, the team at Bitcoin Well is ready right now to take your questions, help you figure it all out, even set you up with a Bitcoin wallet. They did that for me. Gosh, is it ever sexy? Stainless. I got this fireproof thing. I'm not allowed to tell you anything more about it, though. The team at Bitcoin Well can explain why. You'll find them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Coming up in about 10 minutes' time-ish, we're going to check in with Eleanore Sunchild. She's the lawyer for Colten Boushie's family. Can you wrap your mind around the fact it's yesterday marked the 5-year mark since everything went absolutely sideways. On August 9th of 2016, 22-year-old by the name of Colten Boushie was with 4 other friends. They drove onto a farmer's property, Gerald Stanley's property near Biggar, Saskatchewan. And that's when Colten Boushie was shot and killed. You'll remember Mr. Stanley was charged with second-degree murder. He was tried about 3 years ago, and he was acquitted by a jury. And that's when Colten Boushie's family filed a public complaint. Debbie Baptiste, Colten's mom, spoke at length, oftentimes to media, about how she was informed about her son's death, how she was treated in the early stages of that investigation, and an internal RCMP review was not kind to the law enforcement officers that first investigated that case. We're going to talk to Ms. Sunchild from the Thunderchild First Nation. She's an Indigenous lawyer that's represented Colten Boushie's mother, Debbie Baptiste, in court, and I'm sure that she'll have some interesting insight. I mean, these are some of the interviews where you're not exactly quite sure where they're going to go, because, of course, we'll talk about this specific circumstance and the tragedy around this story, but I suspect the conversation will broaden in scope. That's coming up in just a few minutes. A little later on in the show, more Albertans are talking right now, I think, and people across Canada that are paying attention to Alberta's health measures about syphilis. And in part, I mean, let me just say, people should be talking about it because there's been an outbreak and it's a real issue and it affects people, including expectant mothers. This is prompted, though, by a note, and an op-ed, they call it, an opinion editorial. Remember this release? We'll call it a bit of a public address from Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, a number of days ago, describing or explaining why she felt that it was time and why she had advised the provincial government that it was time to kind of move on from some of the more prominent COVID restrictions. Probably more accurate to say virtually all of the COVID restrictions. And Dr. Dina Hinshaw noted a couple of things in the release and basically said, hey, listen, now we can pay more attention to stuff like syphilis and the opioid epidemic. And it gave producer Sarah Hoyles an idea. So we're going to be talking to Dr. Ameeta Singh, who's a syphilis researcher out of the University of Alberta. That's coming up in approximately, we'll say, about 45 minutes' time. And we'll take a look at that IPCC report that everybody's talking about with global warming getting worse. Scientists around the world, climate scientists, are saying that it's time for urgent action. What does that actually mean in our own backyard? What are some of the specifics that scientists are talking about? The Boston Globe did a great job yesterday of laying out kind of 7 steps that people need to be ready to consider, and we're going to take a look at this. This is the type of story that lands, and then our team, our editorial team, gets to work on finding different angles on how this will be relevant to our listening audience and our tuning audience that joins us across Canada. And, of course, as we've told you before, which is really exciting for us, from 60 countries around the world. Now, some of these countries, there's like 3 people joining us from these countries, but they still resonate. They still represent. We still get to
counts.
we get to put the pin in the map on the wall, if you know what I mean. So a shout out to people that tune in and join us from. We see you. We see you with regards to the web traffic. United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, China, Japan, Costa Rica, El Salvador. Maybe that's in part due to our Bitcoin affiliation. I'm not quite sure. I think that might be why.
Think the president's listening in?
Well, you never know. Have we put in that interview request yet? We got to
Not
get that
yet.
one done. Yeah.
Hey, Prez.
Yeah. Get the president of El Salvador on the show. Now that we've put it out into the universe, you got to make sure that happens.
Damn it.
No pressure, Hoyles. Well, I've got some emails in front of me, and of course, we've got a lot of other things to review. Whether or not you're from Edmonton, Alberta, of course, which is our hometown, the city at least where we live right now, where we're running this show, where we're broadcasting from, so to speak, from broadcast to podcast out of Edmonton, Alberta. The Edmonton Police Service on TikTok as well, and we're going to show you a video a little bit later on in the show. For those of you tuning in on the podcast, I would say we'll talk you through it and explain what it's like, but I suspect you've already seen it because it's making the rounds. If you're on social media, you've probably seen this Edmonton police officer. He busts out of, well, can we just show it? Can we roll it once just to show everybody, Sam, here's what we're talking about, and then we'll really dig into it. Just Oils is already shaking her head. Do we have it ready to rock? All right, here's the video we're talking about. Okay, let me explain what's going on for the benefit of our listeners. This is a TikTok video. It says when you get a text from your wife that somebody's at home to pick up your daughter for a date, and an Edmonton police officer comes busting out of, what is it? Is it like a district office or something like that?
I think so. It's got the big crest above the door.
It's got the big crest above the door, so it's clearly a police station. And he comes out to, of course, to the audio from the WWE, the legend Stone Cold Steve Austin, who is big on crushing beers, kicking ass, taking names, all that kind of stuff. And so the police officer comes out and he's got two cans. And, it clearly labels on the video, this is water, not beer. Crushes two cans, gets into his Ford Explorer Cruiser, lights up the cherries, gets the lights going, and squeals off home. And some people, I haven't seen anybody that's like totally, like I haven't seen anybody like flipping their lid about it. I've seen people flipping their lids about a couple other things this morning. Danielle Smith has an op-ed out I think it's in the National Post, if I remember correctly, about carbon capture and storage, which has been interesting. I see a bunch of people piling on Danielle Smith for that. I see some other people ticked off about a couple of other things. The Edmonton Police video, people seem to be a little bit more just like, okay. That's kind of the reaction I have so far. I haven't seen, there are probably some angles that we could dig in on this and actually make it very serious. Not everything in life needs to be totally serious. Some things can be just fun and silly, but also some things that are put out as, I can't wait to see, your eyebrows are almost hitting the ceiling tiles right now, Hoyles. Some things that are intended to be lighthearted and fun and silly can actually land in a different way. Would you like the floor?
Me?
What was your thought when you first saw that video?
I thought, wow, guys, your job is to, protect the people and do your job. It's not to make TikTok videos.
Well, your job is to engage with the community too, right? And to be relevant and to have platforms where people feel like they can engage. So the Edmonton Police, you're not going to have a good listen to me, the expert on TikTok. I think I have like
Tell
40,
me more.
I think I have like 40 TikTok. I've never posted one yet, but I signed up. I think we have like 40 or 50 followers. But you're not going to have a strong TikTok with lots of followers and good engagement if your videos are boring. And so they do this. Like there's an Instagram account from a police department in Iceland that I follow. Don't understand a word of what they're saying about anything, but they're there, and their Instagram has thousands and thousands of followers because it's entertaining and kind of funny and a little more lighthearted, even though I'm sure they attend to fatal car crashes and suicides and domestic violence and all of the problems that law enforcement encounters. So, I have mixed feelings on this one. Can I say that the one thing I'm a little surprised at is I get the spirit of, and let me say this. Let me again reiterate, not everything needs to be serious. Not everything needs to cause controversy. Not everything needs to piss everybody off all the time. I will say the theme of the idea around dating a cop's daughter, and then bigger picture, widening the focus a little bit, the thought of the whole like father protective over the daughter thing, which I understand to a certain degree. I mean, it could be father-son too. It could be any parent and any child. Don't mess with my kid at all. But the whole idea of like the dad on the front porch with the shotgun while the boy comes to take the girl out for a date is just, to me, that's a little bit...
dated?
Well, maybe dated. I was actually going to invoke the supercharged word in this context, which is toxic.
Lots
right?
of toxic masculinity mixed
but,
in there for good measure.
Yeah, but and at the same time, though, can I devil's advocate a little bit here? Like the whole idea of toxic masculinity, which I don't scoff at or write off. At the same time, policing's probably a little bit different. There's people say like, look at these kind of bro-y attitudes with police officers or firefighters, or for that matter, professional athletes, and you can certainly get into, I think, productive conversations around culture and locker rooms and things like that. And then I also think that there's a certain reality of when you're the one, like when you're the first one in, when there's a firearms complaint, things like having people with you. And I think that there are certain mindsets where the whole, let me put it this way, civilians can't always relate. So I think there's probably a lot going on. Is it safe to say there's a lot going on in the video? I'm not surprised people don't really know what to make of it.
I don't understand why that needs to be put out there.
Yeah, fair. That's a very fair and reasonable comment.
I think we have better things to be focused on and doing. And yes, a TikTok, I believe that public engagement is vital and important, but let's get police officers out in their beats, meeting people, getting to know people, instead of slapping up a video about crushing water.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see it. I can see different points
Get out of your
perspective
helicopters,
on this.
out of your police tanks,
But that's kind of what they're doing here. That is what they're doing here. Because if they
You're gonna go crush some skulls of teenage boys.
Well, no, which is also fair. Hoyles, and it's a valid point. But you know what? If the police department were just to be like on their TikTok, like, this is us on the firing range, this is our new SWAT vehicle, this is our new chopper, then everyone would be like, oh, look at the boys and their weapons, and you know what I mean? Like I can see,
toys, yeah.
I can see how they are trying to be. They probably had first of all, probably didn't spend too much time thinking about it. Right? We've probably spent more time talking about it here than they did in putting it together. I think they probably thought that it was a way to kind of reach people in a way that was like a little bit unexpected and somewhat lighthearted. They probably overlooked a couple areas of concern. But also maybe, like I said, not everything needs to be so serious all the time. I think we've touched on a lot of points here. I'm just popping in on the live chat. I can see it is humming this morning, which is great for the most engaged audience in the country. Escher says, it's a funny video, nothing more. Yeesh. AB says, I don't know, cops can take themselves too seriously. I don't mind it. Meantime, Chelsea says the bro culture in the police force is why they think a TikTok like that would be funny to everyone.
Exactly.
I already want to take this question back before I ask it. Does it require, whatever this bro culture is, like what bro culture is, I think that it sort of is somewhat self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. But do you need a little bro culture running through the veins of people that are going to walk up to a house, a suspected drug house with a battering ram, not knowing who's on the other side of the door and what they might have with them, and to knock the door down and come in and tackle somebody and put them in cuffs and carry them out while they're spitting and screaming at you? And we have no idea. I'm not saying perpetuate so-called bro culture. I'd like to know, first of all, what that would represent before I endorse it. But I do think you need to have a little bit of ice running through your veins to be that in that type of calling, in that type of vocation. You're shaking your head. Are you serious?
I am serious. I think that you need to come to that job with intention, and you need to come to that job with an awareness of and maybe I'm going to sound super snowflakey here. I wear my snowflake with pride. The idea that you need to know what the systemic problems are, why that person ended up there.
Of course, Sarah. Of course, but sometimes you got to go knock.
I'm gonna go.
No, Sarah. Sometimes you got to go kick in the fucking door and get him in handcuffs. Like, of course we need to talk about systemic problems. And of course, like, absolutely, 100%. Look at the content on the show. Look at who we talk to. Look at the avenues we explore, and look who we're about to talk to.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, I think, like, we're fooling ourselves if we think that there's not some sort of, that you got to be wired a little bit differently to do the types of things that these officers do. Sam, what do you think?
I guess, like, why is that the part of the job you want to show off? You know what I mean? It's like, it's policing is a complex job, and when done well, connects to the community on levels that they can relate to. And
totally.
I'm saying most cops are very good at that part of their job, and they strive to be good at that part of the job. But the thing that you're putting out to the public to say, hey, look, the police are here, and they're your friends, and they're your protectors, is this video of, you know, basically teeing up a scenario where some teenage boy is going to get his face punched in. Like,
and I do agree with you on that.
What they're insinuating there is just like, there's so much more to the job that they could be showing off. The amount of times that they actually show up and battering ram in a door is like the tiniest fraction of what their actual job is. So why is that the public image we want to put forward?
Yeah, sure. And then on the flip side, they might say, and that's a great point. And on the flip side, they might say, yeah, it was like one TikTok video, you guys, right? Which is also a decent point, right? I mean, I guess they probably will. I'm going to be honest. I've not checked.
One.
Yeah. Is
like
there something?
One pussy grab? Like, that's all it takes.
What?
What I'm saying is that, like, one is enough. It doesn't, like, just to be like, oh, it's just one video. I disagree.
Yeah.
It is showing so much more. And this is where people are like, oh, it's just enough. Like, it doesn't matter. It's no big deal. It's like, how does it inform the bigger picture?
Yeah. And then they might go, it's TikTok. Like, it's TikTok, everybody. And maybe this will get their TikTok shut down, and maybe they won't do any more videos. Tracy says, holy crap, it's a joke. Says it's a joke about a dad and his daughter dating. Everybody needs to lighten up. Whitrium says the video's sexist as hell. Lawlazaz says it proves to me that police officers aren't funny. Scott says the police's job is to protect property, not to protect people. James says police everywhere need to be able to relate to people, and this helps. Lisa says, this is what I expected my ex would have done. There's a reason he's my ex and my daughter won't talk to him. Terry says, I'm totally fine with them making TikTok videos, but this was a huge miss. Brenda says, police are ordinary people like us. He could be on his break when he did this. Fatima says, shout out to Fatima, by the way. I met her in person at the Ayla Brooks show. Cool. What was it, a couple of weeks ago now? Yeah. Week or two ago. So cool to meet her and her sister. Love meeting real talkers in person. Fatima says they failed of all the content they could have created to engage the community. Wigwith says cops are all over TikTok. This isn't the only video that could be pulled up. Some random guy says it's just one TikTok video, but you've now amplified it on an international podcast. So Asher says, what father is actually going to punch out some teenage boy? I mean, come on. We could get into that. You know what it reminds me of? We have a guest. I'm disrespecting our first guest. We got to get moving on. We can come back to this. But I will say this. Why am I drawing a blank on her name? I feel terrible. Was it Emily? We talked about purity culture in the American churches. Emily Jo Allison, was that her name? Am I remembering correctly? I hope I'm right on that. Gosh, was that
Emily Joy?
Emily Joy Allison,
yes.
Right? Perfect. Thanks, Sam. Great conversation. But that's kind of the idea. I mean, I can really blow the doors off this conversation. We should, of the whole, like, father-daughter dances and purity dances. And hey, listen, like, on some level, I'm not trying to take a big steamer on a bunch of people's wonderful family traditions, and this is not questioning your love for your daughter or your son or anything special like that. But there are kind of these undertones of the dad sitting on the front porch with the shotgun while the girl gets picked up by the boyfriend, and it is kind of a weird. That was kind of the not even the undertone, it's the overtone of the video. That was kind of the one that I was like, eee. But hey, it's edgy, it's got us talking. We'll get back to this. I suspect we're going to get some emails on this, which I look forward to. talk@ryanjesperson.com. I promise, like I've done my entire career, I promise I won't just pick the ones that agree with me. If you want to take a big run at me in the emails, and by the way, I'll be able to tell if it's you typing them, Poils. So But if it's audience members, we'll be able to get into that a little bit later on in the show. We wanted to take a second to remind you. I know for a lot of people, this past year has been, when it's come to your studies, a lot of people, almost everybody, moved online, right, in the last year and a half or so. And for a lot of learning institutions, not taking a big swipe at them, but they had to pivot as fast as they could, and it meant for a lot of online infrastructure, et cetera, it was really rushed. That's not the case with Athabasca. Athabasca U is Canada's online university. They've been doing this for ages. Best practices already in place. It means that they were well equipped to take on new students and serve their existing student body from across the country at athabascau.ca. As the rest of your life eases back to in-person, your learning doesn't have to. You can check out different programs and courses, learn about the admissions process, even find out, generally speaking, how does AU work at athabascau.ca. Also, a big shout out to our team at Local Waste. I just got a great email this morning. Did you see me hammering away with a furrowed brow looking all serious? I got an email from Jake at Kubi Energy. He said, hey, we're moving into new digs. They're moving into a new location. It says we're going to need garbage and recycling. He said, can you put me directly in touch with the team at Local Waste?
Get out of town.
I said, can I put the title sponsor of Positive Reflections in touch with the title sponsor of Trash Talk? Yeah, I can do that. And so now Jake and Mikkel and Chris are talking, and thank God they've taken me out of the email thread. I don't need to be lit up like that, but it's just another example of how this Real Talk community works. I don't know who should get this spot. Is it Kubi Energy? Is it Local Waste? Can we just remind you, at kubienergy.ca and at localwaste.ca, you can find different solutions for sustainable solar, net zero initiatives, as well as proper recycling. A great partnership, unofficially, coming together thanks to Real Talk, Kubi Energy, and Local Waste. As mentioned, an impossibly difficult day for a family and friends in Saskatchewan. 5 years ago yesterday, on August 9th, 2016, Colten Boushie was killed by a gunshot when he and 4 others were on the property of a farmer, a property near Bigger, Saskatchewan. That farmer, Gerald Stanley, who was charged with second-degree murder, acquitted by a jury after his trial in 2018. Eleanore Sunchild has represented Colten Boushie's family through the process. An Indigenous lawyer from the Thunderchild First Nation, kind enough to join us this morning. Ms. Sunchild, thank you so much for your time. Yesterday, I would imagine, an extremely difficult day for Mr. Boushie's family. Did you have an opportunity to check in with them? If so, what did they tell you?
Yeah, we actually had an event in Saskatoon. We had a short press conference just to give an update on the family. And then after the media left, we held a private memorial and vigil with the family to provide support for his mom, Debbie, of course, who had a very difficult day yesterday. Colten's sisters, his brothers, his uncle, and his family. So it was actually a really nice day. A lot of people came out and showed support for them. There's a lot of love surrounding the family. There's a lot of love for Colten because of who he was. So it was a good day.
There's never going to be, when you're talking to the parents of a child who's been killed, especially in a circumstance like this, I don't suspect that you're ever going to have a parent say that they believe that there's been true justice, that their normalcy has been restored in any way. It's virtually impossible. In a case like this, from the very beginning stages of the investigation all the way through to the verdict and beyond, I think that Canadians have come to understand, including by way of this internal RCMP investigation, that there were many, many different layers of injustice. Can you describe where Ms. Baptiste is, where Colten's mom is now on that? Does she have the sense that internal investigation provided some form of justice in this circumstance, or is there still the sense of much left undone at this point?
Well, the CRCC finding of discrimination against her was just a small piece of the whole entire narrative. And there's so much more that needs to come out. So, yeah, you're right. There's just a whole lot of justice that needs to be done. More work needs to be done on this file. The family does not have a sense of closure. they do not have a sense that justice was served. So we're still pushing for the public inquiry.
Oh, okay. So I was just going to ask you what the family wants to see done. Why don't we start with that? What steps have been taken, or what's standing in the way of a public inquiry at this point?
Well, basically the government, because the government has the power to order a public inquiry. The federal government has the power to order a royal commission. We'd like to see both, but of course the decision rests with the powers that be, and our Saskatchewan government does not want to open this file. They consider it closed and done. We don't consider it closed and finished by any means.
There are a lot of factors at play that I would imagine might cause a government or an elected leader to be skittish around touching this, aren't there? I mean, this was a hot issue. It remains a hot issue in the province of Saskatchewan and across the country. Can you detail that through your perspective?
Well, the Sask Party's main electorate is a white rural farmer. And I don't think that they want to like, as you said, open it because of that basis. Alberta is probably much the same. But the fact is that, like, I like to talk about actually what happened in the trial, the facts that came out, because there's been so much misinformation, so much discrimination and racism directed towards Colten and his family throughout this process, that it's really important that people know that Colten was sleeping in the back seat of that vehicle when Gerald Stanley started shooting his gun. At that point, the two Indigenous men in the front ran away. And actually, they were in the front, they ran, and that's when Gerald Stanley started shooting. At that point, Colten must have woke up, jumped in the front to try to drive away, and moments later, he was shot in the back of the head. So I think that people forget that Colten was sleeping. Again, Colten had no criminal record. Colten was not in a gang. He was a good person, but like, didn't meet him, but I haven't heard one negative thing about him by the people who knew him. He was a really kind person from all accounts. He was a traditional helper at our ceremonies. He was always there to volunteer. He was taking his safety tickets. He wanted to be a firefighter. He had a good future, and that was taken from him.
Eleanor, I think that most people, I don't want to take anything for granted when I say that I think most people are familiar with this case. And so I certainly appreciate your insight into some of these details. I think it's been well documented that Colten's mom, Debbie Baptiste, the way that she was treated early in this investigation by police officers was deplorable. And in my mind, I'm not sure. I'd be curious for your take on whether or not you believe the RCMP has acknowledged that in as fulsome fashion as you'd like to see. But when you talk about racism through the trial, in particular, what are you talking about?
Well, there were. I encourage everybody to. There's a documentary. It's called "We Will Stand Up." I encourage everybody to see that, because that really tells a good account of what happened. But for example, there were terms that were used in the trial that probably should not have been allowed, such as like "your home is your castle," alluding to castle law, which is not a law in Canada. It has no place in our Canadian legal system or Canadian courts. Just the whole, if you were there, you would see how there was one narrative. Oh, these Indigenous youth were drinking. They were drinking so much. They had so much to drink that day. And then you had hardworking Gerald Stanley, who was fencing, and the terms that were allowed to be used. And we've seen that spread into social media. It became, the drunken Indian, the thieving Indian versus the hardworking farmer. And when it comes down to it, it was a young Indigenous man in the back of a vehicle who got shot in the back of the head. Like, To me, it's not. It's either you create a narrative to support and justify something, but then the other hand, if you think about really what happened, it's a terrible truth.
It's interesting to hear you talk about language used in court, and even not maybe specifically stated. You're invoking the word castle is really interesting, and then the idea, I think, the undertones. As you describe Colten through two different lenses, as he might be presented or represented by Mr. Stanley's defense team versus prosecutors. Actually, on a side note, may I ask you, do you believe that the case was well prosecuted?
I've seen, I've seen better prosecutions. If you read the cross-examination of Gerald Stanley, there were many questions that should have and could have been asked. Like, if it was an accident, how come when the police came, why didn't you tell them? Like, if I had killed somebody and the police came to my property, I would be standing there saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I did this. I can't believe that I shot this person. It's an accident. I'm so sorry. Here's the gun. But there was nothing like that. This family called 911. Then they went inside and they said that they had coffee for an hour and a half while Colten lay outside. Like, who does that? There's so many questions that should have been asked and weren't. That's one example.
I wanted to ask you about language in the court and bigger picture. I mean, I think some background here is relevant. I mean, people would be interested to know you graduated from the Faculty of Law, University of Alberta. You obtained a BA in political science, studied French immersion at Faculté Saint-Jean. You're a much sought after voice. Relating to your knowledge of the former Indian residential school system, the 60s scoop, the resistance, the present-day impact on Indigenous peoples. I hope it's okay with you if I broaden our conversation. I mean, no disrespect to Mr. Boushie or to his family, but in the bigger picture, I mean, a pretty high-profile trial in Alberta, following the murder of Cindy Gladue, and Bradley Barton was found guilty of manslaughter in that death. Some of the language in that court, there were some appalling, I don't have to get into all of it, there were some appalling realities in that trial, including disrespect to her remains or parts of her body used as evidence. But there were even slip-ups, as you well know, in that trial, referring to her, language slips instead of victim saying the suspect. I mean, there were slight little things, but they were big things, and they kept happening. And I'm curious, yourself, as an Indigenous lawyer, with regards to the bigger picture of what you see in Canadian courtrooms, can I ask for your comment on that? The entire country right now seems to be having a conversation on reconciliation. What does that look like in the context of our judicial system?
Well, all of that is systemic racism, or just racism. All of the language, the derogatory terms towards Indigenous women, Indigenous victims, that is what is the basis of systemic racism. So it's not surprising. I have been a lawyer, as you said, for a long time. I've been a lawyer for 22 years, and I've seen systemic racism in my career, but I have never seen such a blatant instance myself of systemic racism as I did in the case of the killing of Colten Boushie. Right from the RCMP press release that stated they were investigating, they were investigating a theft-related property where a life was lost, as opposed to a murder. That's how they phrased it. Right until the Saskatchewan government refused to appeal the verdict, but they let the family know an hour and a half before they had a press conference, knowing that the family was at least 3 hours away. So the family couldn't get there. Family couldn't organize to respond. It was just that sort of disrespect that I seen throughout this trial, not just how the case was handled, but also how the family was treated. It was blatant, and it was terrible to watch. And it's terrible to talk about. I have to practice in the Battlefords. I have to practice in this province. I'm a Queen's Counsel. I like being a lawyer, but I really don't like the racism that I see, and that's why I choose to stand up against it.
How has Colten's death impacted? I mean, if you look back in conversation with the family and that community, their extended circle, you might say, how has his death impacted what I assume is hundreds of people 5 years later?
It's still as raw as it was 5 years ago. Every Indigenous person in our area, but I would suggest in the country, remembers the killing of Colten, but they also remember the moment that the verdict was read and the moment that they learned that Gerald Stanley was acquitted. People always come up and tell me, oh, I remember what I was doing the moment of the verdict. I can't believe that happened. I can't believe that I seen that injustice. I've just felt so disrespected, so terrible. And those moments, Colten will live in the memories of everybody in Canada, even around the world. I met someone from Nigeria a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about systemic racism because this person was of color. And he said, oh, I remember reading about Colten Boushie. So it really is a worldwide issue of systemic racism, and everybody knows Colten, and everybody stands, Indigenous people anyway, most of them stand with the Boushie family. There was so much love, so much support sent to Debbie yesterday, and it really helped her get through the day.
Yesterday was International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. I think it was 2018, wasn't it? That Debbie and a couple of Colten's uncles, I think, had an opportunity to address the United Nations in New York City. I'm not sure if you were there or not, Eleanor, but what sort of an impact did that have on the family? Did they feel like that there was some meaningful action from that, or that they had an audience that was intent on receiving their message and potentially even taking action on it in an international context?
Yeah, I was there with the family. I actually had organized that trip through the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in Saskatchewan. So they gave us their seat to go. And it was if you watch the movie, you'll see it was surreal because we were 37th on the list to speak. And they had got to number 34 when they closed the day. At that point, Debbie stood up holding Colten's picture and crying because she wanted the world to speak, to hear her. So the UN had closed the floor, but when they seen what was going on with Debbie and the family and realized who we were, they opened up the proceedings, and Debbie actually was Jade Tatusis, Colten's sister, who spoke. And the whole delegation stood up. Another rule at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues was that delegates were not allowed to stand, but basically the whole auditorium stood and came and stood behind the family. It was such a powerful moment. And we really felt supported by the world's Indigenous people. The advocacy will continue. It was paused during COVID, of course. We had some trips scheduled to New Zealand, to Australia. We were supposed to go back to the United Nations, but of course, everything was put on hold. So we will continue with that. It's an issue that's not going to go away. We're going to keep pushing because Colten deserves it.
Mm-hmm. Eleanor, before we launched this show about 9 months ago, I had a talk radio show on the AM dial with a largely rural audience. And we would talk about stories. Colten Boushie's death was one of them. And even we would go so far back. I remember talking about You may remember environmental activist Weibo Ludwig. I'm not trying to compare stories. I'm not trying to compare families' tragedies here, but I want to get to a point about dynamics in communities. A young girl, I think she was 15 or 16 years old, was killed by a gun allegedly fired by Weibo Ludwig on his property. And there were many instances. People can look at stories out of Airdrie, Alberta. I remember a firearms prosecution there related to a rural landowner. And I would get these when I would talk about these stories or when I would conduct these interviews. Like if you and I were chatting, Eleanor, the text line that was in front of me would be lighting up with messages from people. A lot of them would be rural landowners. And the majority of them would probably be white. And a lot of them would probably be farmers. And a lot of them would probably relate to Gerald Stanley, to be quite honest with you. And what I could not ignore was message after message after message from people saying rural crime is a huge issue. They would say, I would do the exact same thing if people come on my property, this, that, and the other. I mean, there would be comment after comment after comment like that. And a lot of these comments, especially following the tragedy that Debbie Baptiste and her family experienced with Colten's death, a lot of people would specifically spell out tension between themselves as property owners and Indigenous communities, First Nations nearby. Do you, with an intimate understanding of this case and aware, you're hyper aware of the dynamic here, what you describe as the systemic racism that not just the Boushie family or the Baptiste family or yourself have experienced, but systemic issues. Are you concerned that this exact scenario or something similar to it could happen again and again across the country right now? Okay, so let's talk about that.
It has, for example, I know there's a case before the Alberta courts has a publication ban on it right now, but that's concerning those two Métis hunters in northern Alberta.
Yeah.
So that was something similar. I met this group of women, Indigenous women, who are walking across Saskatchewan and Alberta with water. So they're doing a water ceremony, and there's like 10 of them. There's like, and they're basically Kookums and supporters. When they were walking through a certain part of Alberta, they walked by a farm, and someone at the farm fired 13 shots in the air to scare them. So it tells me that there's still this problem in the rural parts, and it really shouldn't be like that. I think that like there needs to be more dialogue. You know, here in Saskatchewan, there really hasn't been like a mingling between Indigenous people and rural farmers. Like for example, I'll tell you this story. Following the Gerald Stanley acquittal, the RCMP had a series of town meetings, rural town meetings, and one of them was in Purdue. So we decided to go crash it. And there was about 5 of us Indigenous people in that room in this town hall meeting, and the white farmers were getting very upset. They're like, oh yeah, we would do exactly what Gerald Stanley did, and we're really scared, we're really fearful. And then I came in late because I had court that day in Saskatoon. So I came in late, and I was sitting in the back with these white farmers. But I'll just say this. I was raised in the 60s scoop. I was raised by white farmers for a period of my life. So I'm not like, I'm comfortable with them because that's how I grew up, right? So they were sitting there, and they were saying, oh, I was sitting in the middle, and they're saying, oh yeah, just let them try to come on our property, let them see what's coming. And I just said to them, I said, hey, look, you can see me sitting here. Are you telling me that when my son, he would have been, 7 then, I said, are you telling me when my son, gets his driver's, when he's 16, and if he's driving around Purdue or bigger and goes into your yard, if he runs out of gas, you're going to shoot him? And I just asked them point blank, and they said, well, no, we would never hurt your son. We would never do that. We would help him. We'd make sure that he got what he needed and was safe. I said, well, okay, then quit talking like that, because you're just spreading more hatred, and you're fear mongering, and this has to stop. by the end of that meeting, we had like these group of non-native white farmers like lined up to talk to us, all 5 of us, just to say hi. Thank you for coming. It's really nice to meet you. There needs to be like, and the government needs to step in here too, and stop the fear mongering, create dialogue between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous and the rural folk, because really that's all it takes. Like, people just need to meet, and the rural farmers need to realize that Indigenous people are not scary. Like, we're a nice people. We're kind. If they had met Colten, they would see how kind he was. But it's just like, it becomes this mob mentality where people just believe, Natives are going to hurt them. They're going to steal their property. They're going to, create crime, and they should be weary of that and afraid. And they really, like, it takes one bad apple in any culture, white or native, to create that fear. So I think people just need to talk and diffuse the situation. And that's where the government could step in and assist.
I mean, you're talking about something so basic and so obvious, right? And so doable. And your anecdote about hearing that attitude and confronting the attitude, and then ultimately, creating this, I don't know if I'm culturally appropriating the term sharing circle, but do you know what I'm talking about? You facilitated this fellowship. And I know that, I know that to be part of Indigenous tradition. I've been honored to be, I don't want to take things out of context, but I've been so honored to be part of some ceremony that the entire purpose was to bring people together in understanding. And I think that, I'm even seeing right now in our live chat, some people are saying, and I'm paraphrasing, but some people are saying, regardless of what brought those young people onto the property that night, no one should have been killed. There was, people are saying, well, one viewer right now, I see Erica is participating in our chat. She's saying, Mr. Stanley should have done time for what he did, full stop. That does not erase concerns people have about rural crime or trespassing, these types of things. These are supercharged conversations, because I know some people want to say rural crime is very real. And people will say, I fear for my family, and I've had circumstances, or we've lost property, or these types of things. And then someone will say, why don't you care about a young man being shot and killed? And the person will say, well, that's not what I'm saying, right? And what this needs to be is a conversation. And when you talk about the role that governments play, who's going to moderate that, right? Who's going to facilitate it? That in a sense, government's roles are very broad and complicated in some circumstances, and in some they're very simple. And I think that you're bang on in talking about that. And I wonder, do you think it's actually possible? I like to believe it's possible.
I'd like to believe it's possible too, but that's, we have to start by confronting racism, and really talking about the truth. And that comes with education, a lot of education. Children are not racist. They're not taught racism. They're taught racism, but they are not racist inherently, and it's taught. So we should start with them, but also carry on the conversations into adults and into the rural communities. And really, people just need to meet and talk, because here in Saskatchewan, there is such a divide between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous, and that needs to be bridged.
Eleanore, we're unfortunately starting to lose a bit of our connection here, our signal, but I can assure you that your message has been heard and well received. What I mean is meaningfully received by this audience. I want to thank you so much for your candor today, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
Eleanore Sunchild is a lawyer out of Thunderchild First Nation. Sunchildlaw.com is where you can learn more about what she does. She's been representing Debbie Baptiste, that's Colten Boushie's mom, and their family. As a matter of fact, on her website, I saw this, Sarah, that you made the note. She says in her career, she's most proud of the work that she's done representing Debbie Baptiste at the Supreme Court of Canada. I want to thank our audience members as well. I know that this is one of those conversations where This is complex, as many of these things are, and yet at the same time, it's very simple. And I appreciate sometimes if you see a live forum, an internet forum talking about stuff like this, it can make you a little bit nervous. And I appreciate our audience. Obviously, it goes without saying, not everybody's going to agree on absolutely everything. I think that everyone can agree that it's absolutely tragic that a young man lost his life that night. I think I think most people will agree that the handling of the investigation of the circumstance was despicable, quite frankly. People will disagree, I'm sure, on the outcome. And some people will feel very strongly in different directions there. And I think that, the one thing I think that Eleanor makes, many wonderful points, but the idea of people gathering together to talk in community and community leaders meeting, and it's so easy for walls to go up, metaphorically, for these barriers to go up and for people's, misunderstandings about one another or preconceived notions or long-held beliefs, which can include those stemming out of racism and systemic racism. Maybe this is the Pollyanna view on this, but I think it's doable. I think it's possible to bring people together in community and to have these conversations. But that was, you remember, even outside as that trial was going on, Gerald Stanley's trial. That was, outside the courtroom and the national news coverage there. That was a story. I always feel tacky. I always have mixed feelings calling things when someone was killed and another person's on trial calling it a story. It's more than a story, right? Debbie Baptiste never going to see her son again. It's more than a story. But it's a story. It's a reality. It's a court case and ultimately an outcome, a verdict that certainly had Canadians, I hope, wrestling with bigger issues. Asking her, do you think that this could or will happen again? She goes, well, it already is. Always curious for your thoughts on this. If I know you, Real Talkers, I know that some of you have said what you have to say on the live chat. Some of you are going to hit us up later today via our hashtag RealTalkRJ on Twitter when you download this podcast and when you hear it. And some of you are going to wrestle with this. And in the days and weeks to come, I know that we're going to get emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com, and we welcome those emails. And we thank you in advance for sharing your thoughts with us. Before we move on to our next interview, I want to, of course, tell you, you business owners know that it's no secret that running a small business isn't easy. So if you can find little hacks along the way, you take notice, right? Life as a business owner is hectic, to say the least. Well, you can let Alberta Blue Cross help you find peace of mind with a group benefit plan. They offer flexible health, dental, life, and disability coverage for your employees. You can check it all out at ab.bluecross.ca. Your employees can enroll and manage their own coverage at any time on any device. And, of course, it makes life easier for them and for you. Alberta Blue Cross. You can explore your options today at ab.bluecross.ca. We're proud to feed our dogs, Moses and Monroe, Grand Dog Essentials quality raw food. They make weekly delivery to Metro, Calgary, and Edmonton areas with stops right around the Red Deer area as well. This is quality raw food. We have seen return on our investment in spades, most especially with Moses. He's had some digestive concerns over the years, and they've got the beef, the chicken, the turkey, and then, of course, all those great supplements as well. If you go online right now to granddog.ca, you can check it out. You can learn more about how they and their team of nutritionists could find a solution that could benefit your beloved four-legged family member. The promo code REALTALK will get you 10% off your first-time order at Grand Dog Essentials quality raw food. And finally, our friends at Friesen Brothers want to remind you that there are 16 locations across the province of Alberta. The champagne of all chilies has arrived at Friesen Brothers, fresh from Hatch, New Mexico. Have you ever been to New Mexico?
No,
been.
Never.
It seems like it's like a state that nobody ever go. Like, if someone were to travel to New Mexico, you'd be like, "That's cool." I couldn't tell you a single thing about New Mexico, except for that they have these mild, flavorful Hatch peppers that come from there.
You don't say.
Oh, yeah. Guess what? They're a great substitute for any recipe that calls for bell peppers.
Really?
Yeah. So you can
That's enough reason for me to go.
Right? You can throw them on your burger. You can char them on the barbecue. Maybe add them to your salad. Friesen Brothers also has their own ready-made options if you don't feel like cooking. They've got their Hatch chili hummus. They've got Hatch chili, Hatch chili and garlic sourdough. Or you can take and bake the Hatch Chili Father Dough to Go pizza. Friesen Brothers excited to share this new experience with you. Come on by and see these hatched chilies for yourself. Friesen Brothers, Alberta grown, Alberta owned. So let's talk about syphilis. Let's do it. Let's talk about syphilis. This is a conversation that I know that Albertans have been having kind of a little bit, prompted by this release from Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health just a few days ago, is Dr. Dina Hinshaw, talking about the province moving on from COVID restrictions. It was titled Learning to Live with COVID-19, and in her address, she wrote, this has come, talking about the majority of public health resources directed to the COVID-19 response, this has come at the cost of not fully working on other threats like syphilis and opioid deaths. So it prompted the intrepid editorial producer of this show, Sarah Hoyles, to reach out to an infectious disease specialist, a clinical professor with the Division of Infectious Disease at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Dr. Ameeta Singh. Her clinical research areas of interest include STIs, HIV biomedical prevention, and rapid diagnostic tests for syphilis and HIV. That's what we're going to get into today. Doctor, thank you so much for making time for us, and welcome to Real Talk.
My pleasure.
First of all, those are like the coolest eyeglasses I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm sorry. I know that derails the seriousness of this conversation, but those are some sick frames. Very well done.
Cool. Thank
very,
you. I'm
very
glad
well
you like
done.
them.
Well, you're making your Real Talk debut here. We've not yet had a chance to connect. Can you get us up to speed on, through your obviously educated lens, how significant of an issue syphilis is right now in the province?
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, well, I was intrigued to see that Dr. Hinshaw mentioned syphilis as one of the priorities that's been let slide, I guess, during the COVID pandemic, because unfortunately, even though testing declined during the pandemic, for a variety of reasons, people were not going in to see their healthcare providers to get tested. In part because they were afraid of going into doctors' offices and so on. We saw syphilis cases at an all-time high in 2020. In fact, there were over 2,500 cases in the province, with which was 13 times the rates seen in 2014, and still the highest rates that we've had since the 1940s in the province. And what is particularly alarming about the continued rise in syphilis cases is that much of it is concentrated in Edmonton and the North Zone. And about half of those cases are in females. And a significant proportion of those are also been pregnant females. And so it's meant that we've seen, about 135 babies born with congenital syphilis since 2014, and about 30 of those infants have died. So, the expected number in Canada today should be 0. We should not be seeing any cases at all. So that's pretty shocking and horrifying to see that happen.
How does this happen? You say we're experiencing the highest rates since the 1940s. Is it awareness is down? Are people less careful with regards to practicing? Do people even say safe sex anymore? Is that a phrase from like 20 years ago?
Well, we might say the word safe sex, but I don't think there's a whole lot of safe sex being practiced, to be honest, for a variety of reasons. Yeah. There's been the whole social media thing. Increased use of mobile dating apps has just made it so easy for people to hook up. There's a lot of substance use going on at the time of these interactions, which of course impairs your ability to be careful with during your encounters. We also, a good part of what is happening with our syphilis outbreak is related, I believe, to substance use, particularly methamphetamine use in the prairie provinces. And we know for sure from other indirect sources of information that methamphetamine use is among the highest in Canada, in Edmonton. For example, the testing of wastewater has shown much higher concentrations of meth in Edmonton than in other cities in Canada. And some of the, although this is running, of course, parallel to the opioid epidemic, methamphetamine is a stimulant drug which stimulates, sexual drive, and therefore, again, impairs sexual behavior, and makes it more likely that people will engage in risky sexual behavior. And so many of the women, the pregnant women who've been affected by syphilis, are also affected by other things. So, for example, are more likely to be affected by poverty, homelessness, experience addictions and mental health issues. And a significant proportion of those women as well are also Indigenous. And so, again, we go back to the whole, I was very interested to hear your previous speaker talking about the impact, of systemic racism and, the impact of the residential schools have had systemically on what is happening with syphilis.
It's as you're saying this, it's kind of hitting me in maybe a couple of different waves, but it's remarkable to state the obvious over the past couple of months how this common thread has found its way through so many of our conversations. And as I'm looking at the show lineup today, I never would have thought that there would be a common thread that would extend from talking to the lawyer from Colten Boushie's family to talking to you, an STI researcher, a syphilis researcher. But there it is again. Is this something that, do you think in the areas of public health and research, has this been commonly known for quite some time, or are there these awakenings as you see among researchers and public health professionals as we speak as well?
I think it has been known. We've certainly been aware that this has been an issue, but I feel, having worked in this area for over 2 decades now, that what we have been doing with syphilis is really putting out fires. So what we're addressing, the tip of the iceberg here. So sure, we have to do that piece of it. We have to go find cases, treat them, find their partners, treat their partners. But at the end of the day, I question how much impact we're going to have in terms of actually seeing a true decline in cases until we pay more attention to the so-called social determinants of health. Try to do more to address, poverty, homelessness, addictions, because until we're able to do that in a more meaningful way, I really don't believe that we're going to see significant changes. Now, of course, if we look historically at what's happened with syphilis over time, syphilis epidemics do tend to cycle. So they'll tend to go in 10-year cycles, and then for reasons that we don't entirely understand, the rates will decline. But they do tend to come back again if these issues aren't addressed. So, and people ask me, well, they say, well, what are you planning to do about the social determinants of health? It's nice to talk about that. And of course, in our day-to-day work, it's very difficult to address that in a meaningful way. But some of the things that we could try to do is to make sure that our services are working more closely together. For example, in our HIV program that I work with, we actually have a whole team, multidisciplinary team. So in addition to physicians and nurses, we have social workers that work with our program, pharmacists that work with our program. And I think it would be really helpful to have, not in addition to social workers, pharmacists, to have perhaps addictions personnel, or to have the ability to offer all of those services when you interact with an individual, so to be offering them a more comprehensive level of services than just what we're doing right now, which is putting out fires. And honestly, we don't have a choice but to do that because the services are stretched. And that is the priority from our perspective. But, I think that we need to be thinking beyond that. if we want to make a meaningful impact.
You're a doctor and a researcher, and you get it. I'm just a pleb. I'm as they call us, unflatteringly in TV to help everyone keep their perspective. We're the teeth and hair. That's what we are. But it's our job to keep our fingers on the pulse. And I can tell you that for the average civilian, I don't think people know what to think, because we read from, the implication from Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, and I want to ask you about this directly in just a minute. But, the implication is that we've not been able to address in adequate fashion the opioid epidemic, which is absolutely undeniably true, and the syphilis outbreak and other public health issues because of COVID. And the implication is that there's almost a choice to be made there. Where do we want to direct our resources? And the common sense person might say, well, of course there's a choice to be made because we only have so many resources. And then we're going to hear, like I heard over the weekend from somebody that works in scheduling for AHS, that nurses are absolutely stretched and the ERs and ICUs are stressed. And we're talking about how you're saying we're putting out fires because our resources are stretched. And then the politicians are telling us, and they're not entirely wrong, they're telling us that almost 50% of the provincial budget is spent on healthcare, and we spend more than anywhere else. And, yada, yada, yada. We're spending, more now than we did last year. And this government's spending more than the premier did before. And right? You get where I'm going with this. And people are going,
for sure.
Well, like, what the hell is, first of all, I'm not saying anyone's lying, but like, what the hell is the truth? What's the actual reality? We're spending half of what we bring in. We're spending like more than $20 billion a year on health in Alberta. And yet everybody's saying all we're doing is putting out fires and we barely have enough resources to keep going. How is the average person supposed to wrap their mind around this?
Yep. No, that's a fair comment and question. I think health services and public health services in particular do struggle with where to put the priorities, with the focus in terms of what you have in terms of your budget and personnel, which is why I think understandably for the last 18 plus months, the priority has been addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's fair. But unfortunately, I as I see it, some of this isn't related to health per se. So housing, for example, and making sure that people have some basics. Basics is, of course, housing, but some of our persons who are affected by syphilis and infected by syphilis also don't have even things like ID. And so if they don't have ID, they can't actually get even Alberta healthcare. They can't, easily access other services such as income support. So some of those things are what I'm talking about, trying to integrate some of those things into health services.
Do you believe, I alluded to it earlier, that there's a choice to be made. Were you under the impression, or did you see undeniable evidence that the province's response to the syphilis outbreak was hampered by resources being directed to COVID-19? Is that kind of, can we say that's on the agreed statement of facts here?
Yeah, no, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some of our nurses, for example, that were working, trying to see patients with syphilis or to do contact tracing and to offer testing and treatment, were pulled away to do COVID tasks. And even now, we are short-staffed in STI services. So there are open positions. Prior to the pandemic, we had a very well-established outreach team that includes nurses and outreach workers that went out into the inner city to various agencies and inner city organizations to offer testing and treatment. And all of that has been put on hold for the last 15 to 18 months. And I can tell you that from my previous experience, those services have been invaluable in reaching individuals who won't come in and access traditional health services. So if people aren't going to come to you, you have to go to them. And so I'd really like to see us get that going again.
Doctor, I'm not trying to necessarily, I guess I'm perceiving somewhat of a parallel here when we talk about, and again, this gets back to the Chief Medical Officer of Health's, her essay, really, her letter, her open letter, let's call it. She talks about opioid deaths and syphilis. And,
Yes.
and I really hope that this, and I'm glad she shone a light on opioid deaths. I wonder if this was maybe one of the subtle moves that she thought was possible to maybe, I like to think, point out that I don't think that this government's done a very good job on that file. The numbers are heartbreaking. If we take a look at the deaths experienced across Canada right now due to overdose, it's really, the entire nation needs to be paying attention to this. One of the misconceptions about the opioid epidemic that people write it off, and at risk of sounding insensitive here, people can use some pretty hurtful language to describe people who use drugs. And I think that the understanding for a lot of people is that the opioid epidemic is really not to be taken that seriously, because quite frankly, these deaths are people that, have made the choice to be experiencing homelessness and to be using drugs, and they know the risk, and nobody forced them to do these drugs. And then all of a sudden you see these attitudes change, and all it takes is the tragedy of someone's uncle who had a bad knee surgery and got addicted to painkillers and lives in the suburbs and was affluent and well-to-do, and he overdoses. Or somebody, right? You get the story I'm getting at.
You're absolutely right.
They only wake up when that happens. The same thing with syphilis. When you talk to us about people experiencing homelessness and you talk about where there are disproportionate rates, et cetera, do you have a concern that even people that hear this interview are going to go, it's not I'm not worried about it. It's not something relevant to me.
Well, the reality, unfortunately, is that there's so much syphilis out there that anyone engaging in sexual contact outside of a mutually monogamous relationship is at risk for syphilis right now. So I heard a really tragic story last week of a young woman who started noticing some blurring of vision and presented to see multiple healthcare providers on multiple occasions before she was diagnosed with syphilis and treated, and has now been left legally blind. So, we've definitely seen people who don't fit what we might call the sort of characteristic person you might expect to be affected by syphilis. We've definitely seen, because of course, as I mentioned, we've seen women become infected if they have a new partner, for example, and they might have just had the one partner, that they have changed to and become infected then. So there is so much of it out there that honestly, anyone engaging, as I say, in sex outside of a mutually monogamous relationship is potentially at risk.
What are the symptoms people should be aware of?
Yeah. So, the only way to know for sure if you've been infected or not is to get a blood test done for syphilis. And oftentimes, if you are tested for syphilis, you'll also be tested for HIV and other sexually transmitted infections, such as gonorrhea and chlamydia. And typically that's with a urine test. But if you do develop symptoms, it can be sores, which can be on the genital areas or inside the mouth. And if that goes unnoticed, a few months later, people can develop a generalized rash, which can look like a number of other things, and sometimes fever. And but we've seen an incredible syphilis. Sir William Osler calls syphilis the great imitator, because it can present in a whole variety of ways. So we've, for example, seen young people presenting with stroke-like symptoms, with changes in their vision. And we have had a few people lose their vision completely. We've had people presenting with arthritis, so swollen, painful joints across the body. So a whole variety of presentations. And so, healthcare providers need to be thinking about the possibility and doing the blood test in order to pick up that that's really the cause of their symptoms rather than something else. You talk about permanent vision loss, obviously a horrible circumstance. The implications for pregnant women I didn't actually realize until you reiterated at the beginning that this could lead to stillbirths. I had no idea. Yes, no, that's the most horrifying thing in my mind of the impact of what's happening with syphilis right now is what is happening with the babies and the unnecessary loss of birth of children. Because, of course, in Canada today and for decades, syphilis has been a test that is offered to all pregnant women. In fact, if you access prenatal care, it is done routinely. And so no one should be getting congenital syphilis today. And so you may well ask the question, well, why is this happening then? And unfortunately, the situation is that most of the women who are delivering infants with congenital syphilis have not been tested during the pregnancy. And so they're presenting very late on in the pregnancy, sometimes at the time of delivery. And at that time, it's too late to prevent the impact of syphilis. So again, this takes me back to why, if people are not going to come in and access your services, how can you go out and reach them? And so one of the things, that we're trying right now is a rapid diagnostic test. So what that involves is taking some blood from a finger prick specimen to do testing for syphilis and HIV. And it gives you a test result in under 5 minutes, and that test result can be used to offer treatment right there and then. And so what that does is prevents complications from occurring if people don't come back in and get their test results. So sometimes, we test people and then we lose them to follow up. Because their social situation is so unstable that they're not able to come back in for follow-up. So even that study has been significantly delayed because of the COVID pandemic, but I'm really hoping that we can pick that up again as things open up.
Yeah. So this is am I understanding correctly? It's a clinical trial, right? Is this somewhat of a groundbreaking approach to this?
It shouldn't be groundbreaking. These rapid diagnostic tests have been available in the rest of the world for over a decade now. And we have tried to use another rapid diagnostic test in Edmonton about 10 years ago. But unfortunately, that test was a little bit cumbersome to use, and our field staff didn't like it. It took about 40 to 45 minutes, which is just too long, practically speaking, in the field to do that. People don't want to wait around that long. And so that kind of died off. And so when the outbreak started again, I started taking a look to see what was available on the global market today. So many countries, in the developing world are using these tests routinely. And so as it happens, both of the test kits that we're trying here in Edmonton are made by Canadian companies, one in Vancouver, one in Halifax. And the beauty of these two test kits is that they provide test results in under 5 minutes. They're both fairly straightforward to use. So, and the reason that we've set it up as a clinical trial is because they're not approved for use in Canada currently. And we're hoping to actually generate these scientific data, hopefully showing that they do perform well in the field, so that that can contribute to both companies applying for Health Canada approval if they turn out to be, as useful as we think they will be.
I had a couple of friends actually that worked on a project a while ago. I'm sure you must be familiar with Plenty of Sif. Is that on your radar?
Yes.
So unfortunately,
absolutely.
The website is not still live. So I just have this from the ZGM website, formerly known as Calder Bateman, and our friends at Burn Kit in Vancouver, actually, who do the branding for Real Talk, were the ones who designed this Plenty of Sif campaign.
Right. Excellent.
Based, of course, on the Plenty of Fish, the dating site. I'm not sure anybody uses that anymore, but are public campaigns like that, like Plenty of Sif? It was certainly cheeky, and I think it grabbed people's attention. It won a whole ton of awards, advertising awards. Is stuff like that effective?
I think it is effective for people, of course, who are accessing social media on a regular basis, right? I think there's no question that if that is your target audience, and we know that some of the syphilis outbreak has been occurring in individuals who are using social media apps heterosexual persons as well as gay and bisexual men who have sex with men. And so I think that using those forms of interventions is very useful when trying to reach those target groups. Now, it's a little bit different for, some of our syphilis cases, or a good chunk of our syphilis cases actually, that are mostly in the inner city. Then that might be less useful in trying to reach that group. I thought it was a fantastic, media campaign.
Yeah. But you, yes, period, new paragraph. You also make a really great point, though, about access. And, it's certainly designed to reach the savvy web user that's being reached by ambitious and creative ad campaigns. But you're right, for people experiencing homelessness, people without that technology, people with, for whatever reason, that already have barriers that exist between themselves and equitable health care or accessible health care. Certainly that might require different solutions, which you've detailed here. This is a fascinating area of study. Thank you. You've hung out with us you've given us almost 40 minutes of your day. I'm really grateful for that. Thank you. Just looked at the clock like, oh my God.
I just looked at the clock. Yes.
You're 20 minutes late.
It went so fast,
Yeah, it did go so fast. Before we go, hey, let me ask you something on a side note, and I promise I'll let you go. And this is our chance, my time, to ask you if we've missed anything important. But I do want to ask, and again, this comes back to COVID-19, but you've provided some very interesting insight into not just syphilis, but also methamphetamine use in populations relating to this wastewater testing and the fecal testing and everything else. And my understanding is that in the absence of, for example, with these COVID-19 tests and data being released to the public, that researchers, public health professionals will still have some sense of the prevalence of COVID-19 and other health issues in a population based on that fecal testing or the wastewater testing. How reliable is it? I mean, obviously you can't tell. I mean, if you're downstream from Edmonton testing water, you don't know if it's Mill Woods or downtown. You don't know if it's men or women. You don't know if it's visible minorities. You don't know if it's the elderly, right? I mean, you can only...
Yeah, no, and you make an excellent point. All that's giving you is really a snapshot for a huge, geographical area. For example, it would be the city of Edmonton, what's happening with COVID-19, but it certainly isn't providing as much information as it would be if you were testing individual persons. But I think it will be a good marker going forward, but it would have to be one of a number of different pieces of information that are used to try to figure out what's happening with the COVID pandemic.
This is Craig just says, dang, syphilis is scary. Thank you for, if nothing else, Ameeta.
Use condoms.
Use condoms. Yeah. Is that the number one thing?
They
use
do
condoms?
Work.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do work.
Yeah. All right. Well,
they're just not very popular.
Yeah, they're not popular, are they?
No.
Well, I don't know. I'm so out of it. I was like, if I'm going to even talk about like Plenty of Fish and Tinder, and like I have no idea. This is I was off the market by the time that stuff came around. I don't even know what.
I hear you.
My friends tell me that Tinder's not a thing anymore. There's Bumble and some other one that's apparently so popular. Yeah. But this Hinge, that's exactly right. Hinge is the one that everybody talks about now. But Doc, it's interesting. You as Dr. Singh goes, I thought he said he was letting me go. You talked about the pandemic and how syphilis rates are up, and I'm sitting there going, but I thought that people weren't hooking up as much because of obvious reasons. That I thought a lot of people's kind of scoring game kind of slowed down a little bit, but it also probably reiterates some of the more marginalized populations, the more at-risk populations you talked about, where there weren't a lot of options for people to isolate, and there probably wasn't as much, do I call it behavioral change?
Yes.
Yeah.
No. I think, it's been a mix. Certainly some individuals changed their behavior, but our observation has been that many did not. So,
Dr. Ameeta Singh, an infectious disease specialist, a clinical professor at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation, which I wouldn't say I expected to say about syphilis, but I did quite enjoy the conversation.
Never a dull day.
Never a dull moment here on Real Talk. That's Dr. Ameeta Singh. What a debut. I love it.
All right.
Yeah, you got to
take care.
Yeah,
bye-bye.
For sure. And certainly it's not the point, but the most stylish eyeglasses I think that we've seen in a while. I'll have to follow up with her. Nobody gets mentioned for free on Real Talk. We'll have to follow up with her privately, find out where she gets her specs. It's time for me to upgrade. Dr. Ameeta Singh, love it. That wasn't as awkward as I thought. It's good to have conversations like this.
But I think that's precisely the point. The fact that like we don't talk about it. We're like, yikes,
Right?
syphilis.
Yeah.
And these are things we need to talk about. This is health. This is whole health.
Blindness, stillborns, like.
I've been watching Nick, which is a HBO show.
Okay.
And it's about the 1920s in New York City and about the outbreak of all different kinds of things at a hospital. And a woman comes in, she's lost part of her nose because of syphilis. And I was just like, excuse me, what?
Syphilis?
I didn't realize
Sounds like
that.
leprosy.
Right. So it says with penicillin, it can be cured. So it's not incurable, but it just kind of blew my hair back. The idea of like, I didn't realize blindness. There's all kinds of results from that. I mean, I'm digging in when I watch the Nick. I'm just digging into the pandemic life and just, saying I'm in it for the long haul. I'm staying home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody's predicting or forecasting the roaring 20s again.
Yeah.
Right now, 100 years later, the roaring 20s again as society emerges out of this COVID fog, this COVID haze. It'd be interesting wouldn't it be interesting to see, like, I don't know if those companies like Tinder and Hinge and Bumble would ever release the numbers, but if you could get that data on actual slowdowns versus perceived slowdowns of the so-called anonymous hookups. Ooh. Right? Like did I talked to my buddy, I won't even say his name, the other day, but he was like telling me how excited he was to be dating again. And this is kind of crude, but it's fact. A lot of people can relate. He's like, dude, I haven't been laid in a year and a half. I was like, well, Maddie, not his real name. No, it is his real name. His name is Matt. His name is Matt, and he's not had sex in a year and a half. But he had a date this weekend, so maybe he has now. But same sort of a thing. I know a lot of guys named Matt. I probably know a lot of guys named Matt that haven't had sex in a year and a half, as a matter of fact. Most of them are married. This one's not. Oh, the old ball and chain, eh? The old ball and gotta go tell the old lady there what's up, eh? The old ball and chain, eh? But seriously, like how many single people, the mixers and the minglers, actually, through the course of like, please isolate, stay home, save lives, don't swap spit. I sound like a 90-year-old right now. But all of these, the spirit of the pandemic, it wasn't a lockdown. It wasn't even close to a lockdown. It never was a lockdown, but it was a slowdown. It was a bit of a shutdown in some circumstances. No bars were open, no nightclubs were open. But were there still those singles making eyes with one another in the bakery at Friesen Brothers, or in the getting their oil changed, or so kind of like, hey, the fireworks happened, and were there still hookups that people just couldn't tell anybody about? And if there were hookups, if you did have that out of nowhere and it just happened and there were fire, and we, as they say in Short Circuit 2, we sing it, we dance it. If you had that magic night together, could you tell any? Johnny Five, still alive.
I love
one of the greatest movies of all time.
Sorry.
Although I'll never watch it. I'm not going to watch it again to ruin it.
Yeah, it would be ruined.
My buddies and I were talking just the other day about Ernest. Ernest goes to jail. Ernest goes to camp.
Yes!
We were saying, well, Jim Varney died so young. What a shame. I'll bring this back.
Okay.
The conversation started with John Candy. I couldn't, because he died. I just realized this year. We were talking about Canadian legends in film and some of the legends of, one of the all-time greats. And everybody could agree that John Candy is one of the all-time greats. Looked him up, 44 years of age.
Get out of town.
Yeah, he died at 44.
Yowzers.
Wild, hey? So we're talking about that, and then, oh boy, now I got to walk this back and figure out where I was going. But we were talking about all that, and I lost my train of thought.
Hooking up
in
the times of COVID.
And yes,
and
we're
your
talking
friend
about these
Maddie
hookup
not
apps
being able to get laid for
poor Maddie, who's never going to tell me anything ever again, especially when I now tell you his last name is. And you can follow him on Instagram at
his handle is.
It's just I'd be curious to know what if people actually, because then if you did hook up and if magic did happen, right, we're walking it back. We agreed you can't watch the Ernest movies again because they'd be ruined. We think that they were great, but they probably weren't that good. And then
Police Academy. Did you ever watch Police Academy?
Are you kidding me? The guy that could make all the. Was it Steve Gutenberg was one of the stars? That was his name? Or am I thinking of the guy that invented the printing press? I think it was Steve Gutenberg, right? In the Police Academy films. But could you if you did find that magic through times of COVID and you did hook up with somebody socially, that would have been very unpopular, right? No, it would. Of course it would. Do you think?
Well, because on the apps, you're allowed, like you basically say like, what is your comfort level around, well, right now it's like it allows you to say you're vaccinated or not, or partially vaccinated. And also it let you know, if you wanted to meet up and have safe distance, if you want to be masked, unmasked, indoors, outdoors.
Are you serious? Really?
Yes.
So on the dating apps, and I think this is smart. I think it's great. I would like to
Very
know if
proactive.
I would love to know if I was about to go for coffee with a COVID denier. I would like to know that, There
wouldn't be a second date.
Well, there wouldn't be a first date. Are you kidding me? That's what?
But this is real talk. Don't you want to go and meet them and talk to them and find out why they're?
I can get enough of that on the internet. Thank you very much. I can put something out on Twitter like IPCC report out. Globe heating up at unprecedented rate. People like James Snider of the World Wildlife Fund sounding the alarm. And then that just invites enough. I'll hear from enough COVID deniers and climate change deniers. Although I think at this point I have most of them muted or blocked. Somebody came at me the other day and was like, "Oh, are you going to block me?" I was like, "Dude, I block. I hand out blocks like Dikembe Mutombo. Like, I'm not. That's not an insult. Oh, Jesperson blocked me. You didn't win. I'm not going to deal with. I used to be like, oh, give them another chance. They're probably having a bad. I'm now just like block. Like I'm Dikembe in there. It doesn't matter to me. But I'd be curious to know now if they're drawing that line on the dating apps and on and where this is going to become like Quebec and the rest of Canada. A distinct society within another.
Well, I think
the unvaccinated. Now people are going to say Jesperson compares Quebec to the unvaccinated. Not my point. Not my intention. But I do believe that their will, right, is becoming more and more relevant. There's this big dust up in our home city right now about these, a couple of restaurants. There's a juicery in town that's comparing, vaccine requirements for businesses to basically experiments during the Holocaust, and they're going to pay the price. They are paying the price for that right now. I'm not naming them. I'm not going to pile on them. I don't even want. I have better things to do than enter that fight. But I think that people can probably prepare themselves for a reality. Like we see in Manitoba right now with the QR code on the phone. You want to come in my restaurant? Scan the QR code. Prove to me that you're double vaxxed. Come on in. Yeah. And if you're not, beat it. No shirt, no shoes, no vax, no service.
It's just like a bar with, like 18 plus. Show me your license, your driver's license. Are you 18? No?
Sure.
Beat it.
Or like golf courses. Are you rich? Are you white? Are you male? If not, beat it. That's a joke, and I love golf.
I have to go back to one thing around the dating apps. There are, yes, the vaccine and vaccination is important, but you can also tell a lot if someone is taking a photo with their phone in the mirror back at themselves. That's a big like red flag.
Why is that? They want to show their whole body. They want to show their fashion.
Well, you shouldn't. Does that mean that you don't have any friends to take photos of you?
Or a tripod?
Or
Really, guys? Your criticism on the dating app is that the person doesn't own a tripod?
That's a non-starter for me.
Okay.
And the shirt off.
First of all, you have a girl. You have a fiance, first of all.
Yeah, I know.
And shirts off. I mean, to guys, don't take your shirts off. Don't do it.
Well, don't worry. I never would. Like my buddy Jimbo told me once, I'm cut like a bag of milk.
I got a magazine cover.
You know who's not cut like a bag of milk? Yeah, that's right. I was nude on the cover of a magazine back in May, wasn't I? Do we have one here?
Where is it?
Yeah, we have one here somewhere. If you haven't seen it by now, you don't give a flying fuck. Let's be honest. I should let some time simmer after dropping that bomb before I start talking about the World Triathlon Championship finals, right? It was teeing up so nicely, taking off the shirt.
These guys,
pecs.
Yeah, that's right. These guys are not cut like a bag of milk.
These guys and gals are the fittest athletes on the planet. And coming up August 20th through 22nd, they are all touching down in Alberta's capital city, the city of Edmonton, Canada's triathlon city, which is one of only 3 cities in the world to be hosting it for the 3rd time. Check this out. I want to feature edmonton.triathlon.org, the community event maps. This is so easy to use. You want to watch the open water swim? See, this is, for me, I'd already be out at the swim. Forget it. I'm already dead last. I'm getting kicked in the face. These guys, The urban cycling fondo, which is going to be a ton of fun to watch. There's that sprint corporate triathlon that I know a lot of people are excited about. And then the try a try. See if it's a good fit. There are so many different options for involvement as a fan, like a spectator, with distanced, pre-booked seating, all of it free. If you'd rather volunteer, what an opportunity that is. And of course, ways to get involved as well. You want to work up a sweat? You can check it all out online at edmonton.triathlon.org. We also wanted to take the time to remind you that our friends at Dairy Queen are putting their money where their mouth is this month, the entire month of August. They wanted to make a meaningful contribution in the spirit of reconciliation. So they reached out to the Wahkutewin Society. This is a society that hosts annual retreats for Indigenous women who've survived both residential schools and cancer. And they provide these retreats, including sharing circles that allow for what they describe as fundamental, culturally intuitive healing tools so that these women can be empowered to wellness and strength and return to their communities in leadership roles. It is such an inspiring story. And for the month of August, the 6 Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park will be donating $1 from every ice cream cone sold. Every cone counts. Every child matters at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Well, you've no doubt seen at least some chatter around the release of this IPCC report. It was released just yesterday. As you can see, Climate Change 2021, the report, a new global climate science journal confirming that humans have irreversibly altered the planet and locked in many changes. Climate scientists around the world are urging immediate action, and we'll be focusing on this in the days and weeks and months to come, if you will, from a number of different perspectives. What about what this means for nature, for the world around us, for those living beings that share planet Earth with us humans? James Snider, kind enough to join us on behalf of the World Wildlife Fund. James, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for doing this. Welcome to Real Talk.
Hi, Ryan. Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show.
How did this report land in your lap? With a big thud? I mean, did from your perspective, is it a tell me something I don't already know, or what was the impact of it yesterday for you?
Yeah, so this 6th report from the IPCC really is a synthesis of the best available science from around the world. I think there's over 14,000 pieces of science that underlie this report that was released yesterday. Over 195 countries are involved in that IPCC. 65 countries were represented in the report. But the findings there really, I think, are a stark reminder in terms of really that climate change is happening. It's happening now. The evidence for that in terms of the physical science of why and how climate change is occurring is unequivocal. It's human cause. Our GHG emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions are causing a warming of the atmosphere, and that the window for us to limit that change to 1.5 degrees, which is really a critical threshold in terms of seeing catastrophic tipping points, that window is closing, but it's still scientifically achievable, but we need to act now. That was the main point that I would take away from the report released yesterday.
We took a look at the release from your organization, the World Wildlife Fund, which of course is known around the world. Part of it reads, altering the path ahead is scientifically, as you've just reiterated, still possible, which I think is an important detail. I think that people need to have some optimism here among the stark reality of the data. You say if, though, per the World Wildlife Fund, if we take urgent and strong action to reduce carbon dioxide emissions immediately with the window rapidly closing, it's critical that these plans include nature-based solutions. Take us into what that could look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key takeaway, of course, is rapid reduction in our emissions. So rapid, urgent, and broad-scale reductions in our emissions to net zero by 2050, mid-century. And if we do so, it is possible to escape the worst of what climate change might mean in terms of broad-scale warming, in terms of both the massive changes that could mean. And in Canada right now, we're witnessing that incredibly high temperatures, some would say extreme warming, drought, and as well as fires that have been happening right across many parts of our country, ravaging wildfires. And those risks, those hazards are increasingly on the horizon if climate change continues to run away. But if we take urgent action now, it is possible for us to reduce our emissions to get down to net zero. And what we say when we refer to nature-based climate solutions is to really empower nature to help remove and reduce those emissions from the atmosphere. Our forests, our wetlands, our grasslands can be this critical sink or sponge, if you will, to help remove those greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, like methane, out of the atmosphere, and can really be a huge driver of getting a long way to those emissions reductions. And in so doing, also tackle the other dual environmental crisis, which is biodiversity loss. And I think that's the other side of the equation here that's so important, is we are also in the midst of an extinction event. We're seeing the loss of biodiversity globally that has unparalleled really on geological timescales. And the drivers of biodiversity loss and climate change, many of them are the same. And in turn, the solution can be the same by investing in nature, investing in protection and stewardship of important ecosystems, that we can halt the loss of biodiversity and also take meaningful action to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to get to net zero, to stabilize our climate, and provide really that safe, habitable Earth that we rely upon as people really around the world.
It's fascinating. I mean, I'm grateful to have your perspective on this in the context of the IPCC report and climate change. I mean, we've been having conversations about biodiversity and forests when it comes to reforestation following logging and forestry. This is a conversation that's been occurring in British Columbia and Alberta, of course. This is a bit of a different angle on it. Now, some of the conversations there have been in the area, as I mentioned, of essentially planting, right? Planting post-logging. And some of the complaints we've seen, or some of the comments we've seen from people, is that these forests are not restored to reflect the nature of biodiversity was there before. In other words, you just maybe, plant a big swath of pine or of aspen or whatever. It's not what it was like before. Are you talking specifically, when you talk about preserving, are we talking about, is the biggest challenge right now preserving natural grasses and forestry? Is it restoring? Is it returning land to what it once was? I mean, how do you approach this if you're the average Canadian trying to wrap your mind around what maybe political leadership might look like on this file? What should you be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all of the above in terms of what you've listed. And I think your concerns around some of these plantation type efforts that they don't necessarily have the biodiversity value are held by many. I would say protection and stewardship are critically important. The amount of carbon that's stored in our ecosystems is vast. It's really quite massive, astounding amount of carbon stored in our natural ecosystems, our forests, our wetlands, our grasslands, our coastal ecosystems, even our tundra ecosystems, underneath the permafrost there is an absolutely massive amount of carbon. Part of the equation is that we need to reduce the emissions from those ecosystems. As much as 30% of our total emissions into the atmosphere are through the destruction and degradation of our ecosystems, our natural ecosystems, that land and our soils. And so if we're able to stop that, if we're able to stop that degradation, to stop that fragmentation, to stop the conversion of those important carbon sinks, those carbon storage areas, some places that have been accumulating carbon over thousands of years, that if we can stop the conversion of those important places, that will go a long way to at least stabilizing our emissions. And in turn, through removals, by investing in those same ecosystems, they can continue to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere and store it over time. And so that strategy really needs to be, I think, threefold, which is protect those important carbon sinks that exist as they exist today, our forests, our wetlands, and again, our peatland ecosystems, massive amount of carbon in our peatlands. And then in turn, invest in the stewardship, again, of our forests, managing them actually for carbon. That's something that I think is a new idea, right? When we look to how we manage our forests, how do we actually optimize the forest management, our grassland management to store and secure more carbon? And in turn, yes, investing in broad scale restoration, including things like reforestation. All three of those components, protect, manage, restore, need to be essential to our strategies in terms of the role of biodiversity, the role of natural ecosystems, and preventing future climate change.
James, how many years have you been involved in what you might describe as environmental advocacy?
Let's say that 14 years.
14
so
years?
I've been, more than a decade working in conservation in Canada.
So you've seen over the course of 14 years, you've seen conversation evolve big time. To include things that were maybe once theory that are now reality, like things like price on carbon.
Sure.
I think maybe people are taking severe weather events a little bit more seriously, things like wildfires and rising sea levels and all that kind of stuff. The point of my question is to ask you, based on your experience, what does a report like this do? Because if you were to come up with some sort of a metaphor on what this is like, if you're behind the wheel of a vehicle, maybe I'm providing some irony here, but if you're behind the wheel of a vehicle, this is the equivalent of every red light on the dashboard flashing at you, right? Or this is the equivalent of if you're, steering the Titanic, all warnings should be going off about, the fact that we're headed straight for an iceberg. Does a report like this, if you read it and if you see I was reading the Boston Globe this morning, scientists are sounding the alarm, hundreds of them from around the planet.
Absolutely.
Does it actually resonate with members of the general public? Like, does the public actually feel the urgency, do you think, that these climate scientists do, or that you might?
I think increasingly, yes. I think, as you said, climate change for so long was this theoretical thing that was on the horizon, right? Like it's coming. Let's be careful of what's on the horizon. Climate change is here and now. I think that it's indisputable that we are now seeing the effects of climate change here in Canada. That people, the common person right across this country is able to see that climate change is happening through increasing temperatures, through increasing drought events that we're seeing, the massive fires that we're seeing now year over year in many parts of this country. And so increasingly, yes, I think that across this country that there is a growing understanding, a growing appreciation of why climate change is now this massive issue that isn't just in terms of far-flung parts of the world. That's happening here at home in Canada, and that action is needed. I think there's increasingly broad-scale public understanding of that. In terms of what is required, in terms of the steps that we need to take right across this country and around the world, that's the other side of the equation here, which is the scale of what needs to occur in the decades ahead of us. And there really is a very short window of action. And that would be perhaps the biggest takeaway of the report that we saw yesterday, is the sense of urgency, the sense of time for action is now, that we need to act and be reducing our emissions, not 5 years from now, not 2 years from now, but now. It needs to happen because that window is increasingly growing short.
I saw that a former colleague of mine in terrestrial radio, her name was trending on Twitter across Canada. So I couldn't help myself. I had to see why Danielle Smith was trending. And she's got this opinion piece in the National Post. I want to recognize, we're talking to James Snider. If you're just tuning in, streaming our audio live on the Mixlr audio app, James is a conservation biologist with the World Wildlife Fund, Vice President for Science, Knowledge, and Innovation. What a cool job title, by the way. But I want to acknowledge this may be getting out of your wheelhouse, James. So if you feel like this isn't maybe necessarily an area where you want to offer informed comment, that's fine. But I had to see why people were lighting their hair on fire regarding Danielle's opinion piece. And she's talking about carbon capture, storage, and technology. And she gets into this. And here's what I wanted. The pointed question. She says greenhouse gas emissions were about 740 megatons in 2005. She's talking about Canada. That means the government wants us to be at 405 megatons by 2030 to hit these goals established by the federal government and based on commitments, the Paris Accord, and everything else. She says as of 2019, which are the most recent stats available, we're at 730 megatons. Danielle writes, so in the first 15 years, we reduced emissions by 10 megatons. Now we are apparently going to reduce emissions by 325 megatons in the next 10 years. She then goes on to ask, do you see how this might be a problem? How would you respond to that? I mean, it describes, obviously, when you put the numbers like that, most people, I think many people anyway, would scoff at the ambition required to hit a target like that. I'm curious to know what your take would be on it.
I think it's a great characterization, actually, a really well put description of the size of what we have to accomplish. We need to nearly half our emissions, right, from over 700 by 2030. And then after 2030, we need to have it again in the decade following, and again the decade following, till we get to zero. That's what needs to happen in the next 30 years. And so the ambition there is huge. Absolutely. The scale of action that is required is massive. And I think increasingly we need a broad scale recognition of what that action is, that we need to invest in it now. The longer that we wait, the steeper that curve of reduction will be. It'll be a near cliff. And so I don't think that those numbers necessarily say, oh, it's not possible. What it says to me is, well, we better get moving. We better do this now. Otherwise, it's going to be even more challenging in years ahead. So that would be my take on it, is that this is a very clear sign. The indicator is there. The science is there. It's very clear what we need to do. And the public support is increasingly there, because the perils, the impacts of climate change are increasingly real, and they're impacting us right across the country. So now we need to act. We need to reduce our emissions. We need to be investing in a broad suite of strategies, of policies and programs that get us to those goals, and we need to act now.
If I were to ask you to grade governments on how they're doing on the file from A down to F, is it a fair? You're in Ontario, right, James? Is that right?
I am. I'm here in Toronto.
So I guess I can ask you, can I say, how are the provinces doing on this? And you'd probably say, well, which province? I mean, right, I would imagine. How's the federal government doing on this? Maybe you could give a comment. Could you provide some insight into maybe provinces that are doing well, or provinces that need to do way better, and maybe an assessment on how the federal government's doing, per the mandate that you and so many others are setting out?
Sure. Well, that's a tricky question, right? Because I think we're seeing a real diversity of performance across the country in terms of relative ambition on climate, in terms of governments, in terms of where they want to go, and their relative willingness to embrace the science and really tackle this head on. I think there has been a tendency, and this is not new, for many governments to simply want to wait, to not to have to deal with it, because the magnitude of this issue is so large. And where do you start carving away at that mountain of emissions that we have? And I think what I would say is that for any government that sees the science and that knows that it's unequivocal, that there are scientists around the world that have agreed upon this, that there's no doubt here that climate change is occurring, that climate change is human caused. And let's not get caught in debating that issue any longer, but rather let's get on with the task ahead of us, and let's really jump into the deep end and see what are those innovations that we can bring to the table that can catalyze our economy, right? Let's not fall into the trap of framing this as a climate change versus economy. There are governments around the world. I think arguably there's governments like already in Canada that have seen the opportunities in terms of actually stepping into this and seeing what is the new economy that we can create. How can we build jobs, build our economy, build livelihoods for our communities right across the country, and that it is possible. And I think we don't want to be a laggard here. We don't want to be left behind in the new economy. We want to be leading it. And that's true on a global stage.
James Snider is Vice President for Science, Knowledge, and Innovation, conservation biologist with the World Wildlife Fund. Thanks for making time for us today, James. It's been nice to connect.
Great. Thanks for having me on the show, Ryan.
Yeah, you bet. It's kind of the theme today is like, thank you for joining us for this wonderful conversation about the end of the world as we know it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Haas chiming in as well. Haas, by the way, gets credit for yesterday, which was deemed by Real Talkers I saw on Twitter, the authority that is Twitter, to be the author and deliverer of what they called the quote of the week, wondering if sidewalk chalk outside constituency offices for MLAs could perhaps be washed away with crocodile tears. So Haas should walk around with that banner, that badge of honor this week, chiming in again and says, if you look at IPCC reports over the years, this most recent report almost seems inevitable thanks to our collective inaction. Greg chiming in says, the scale of massive change is also going to be great for the economy, but we need to stop allowing oil and gas companies to influence government policy.
That's great, and I agree, but how the hell do we do that?
Well, I don't know. Pay attention to who you vote for, number one. But also, hey, it's a reality that industry is going to form or play a role in forming government policy. That's been the case for as long as there has been government. What does leadership look like? I've got friends that are working for oil and gas companies that always say to me, they're like, we are energy companies. People have no understanding of how forward we are thinking, of how bullish we are on sustainable energy. It'll be interesting to see. I got a text this morning as I was powdering my nose and preparing for the show. I got a text from my buddy Bob Delamar. We went to university together. I haven't seen him in person since university. He says, I'm moving to Alberta. He and his family are moving to Alberta. He says, I'm not cheering for the Oilers or the Flames, but we're moving to Alberta. It's because his company, Canada Clean Power and Climate Technologies, are partnering with the Frog Lake First Nation east of Edmonton, and they're building up, they're partnering up rather to build a net zero power plant.
Cool.
Yeah, and so he's moving to Alberta. This is a great story. The national focus is on this idea that everyone's not this idea. I'm not discounting it. It's a problem. Doctors and nurses among them, people that are leaving the province, people that are leaving Alberta. People are saying this is brain drain. At its core, this is the real problem Alberta's going to face. Here's a guy that's bringing tech and innovation and an opportunity for partnership, Indigenous economic participation, and all of the things. It ticks a lot of the boxes. I said to Bob, we better get an exclusive with you, and we better. So that interview will be coming up on Real Talk. I'm excited to reconnect with him. He's one of these guys. He was he the president or of the Lester B. Pearson Society at university? We went there together. He was a model UN guy. He went on to earn his law degree, and he's one of these guys where even as a 21-year-old, I'd be talking to Bob, and because we're both involved in Model United Nations. And the whole time I was like putting up, it's kind of like what I do on the show. The whole time I'm going, I am out of my depth on this conversation big time. Every time I talk to Bob, I'm like, this guy's way smarter than me.
So Bob is an underachiever is what you're saying.
But yeah, I'm excited that he's moving to Alberta. This is a great ad for Alberta. It appears, and we'll look forward to the conversation, but it appears to be an amazing opportunity with the Frog Lake First Nation. Anyway, this coming back to Greg's comment about how the opportunities for economic participation and quite frankly, wealth building are there. I think if people are able to, process what moving forward looks like, where the economies are going, where global trends are going, where expectations are, what emissions reduction looks like. I like that James didn't back away from that. I would say, here are the numbers that Danielle Smith includes in her opinion piece in the National Post. And he goes, yeah, paints a pretty clear picture about what we have to do.
I find it terrifying, and I feel hopeless.
Oils.
I do. That report, it basically underscores, like exclamation points, all my feelings. And I don't know what to do. I feel, I can vote yes, and I can do my little part in the choices that I make, but this is epic.
When we say you can vote, too, let's be clear that you don't just vote against one party that you perceive to be doing a lousy job on the climate file, so you automatically vote for the other party. Demand vision and strategy and a plan from political parties, meaningful action on the climate file. And of course, we will continue to explore, as part of these ongoing conversations that we have, continue to explore what that actually looks like. Or I said, Straya, nice to have you back in the live chat, I said, Straya, who made a note earlier today. They said, I had stepped out of watching this live for a couple of weeks. We know for a lot of people that's the real. We don't blame you for going to Penticton and doing wine tours in the Okanagan. We don't blame you for that. Well, it's good to have you all back. September is going to be, we're going to see the audience start coming back in September when people get back into their regular routines. I said, Straya said earlier, I step away for 2 weeks of the live chat. I come back and it's the Edmonton Police TikTok video. Woo-wee! Welcome back, right back into one. But they say on this one, unfortunately, in Alberta, a lot of people see oil and gas as synonymous with economy. And in part because that has been the case for many decades and it is still relevant. But at the same time, people need to understand that there are opportunities that exist with regards to where industry is going. And I know that that's obviously for a lot of people got to be a big part of the conversation around, what are your kids studying in post-secondary? What are you recommending that people look into when it comes to career changes? What does transforming or reinventing yourself look like? How often do we talk about Athabasca University and these online courses and people that are making, steps and making meaningful moves to better prepare themselves for a career transition? It doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be scary. Trust me. I've been through a career transition in the last 9 months. It's scary as hell. Scary as hell. What did I do? I identified some skills that I had. How does it apply to a new industry, an emerging industry, digital new independent media? And we're making it happen. I mean, I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I'm not trying to ignore or gloss over some very real challenges and barriers that exist and that people face, but you got to find it within you to a certain degree. People will say, listen to this guy oozing his privilege. To a certain degree, fair enough. But at the same time, hey, man, the world's going to keep moving. And you're going to make the choice on how you react or respond to it and the steps that you take. Just like the team at, that might be a little bit of a stretch, right?
Well, we couldn't have these important conversations without the team at.
Well, I mean, there's a perfect opportunity to talk about our friends at Park Power.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the team at Park Power, you know what's amazing is internet, electricity, and natural gas is their wheelhouse, and then I see them online and all the things they're talking about. They're fascinated with energy transition and solar and the new innovation. There's so many reasons why we're proud to partner with Park Power. Another one is the fact that Chris, the owner there at Park Power, he's in touch with us personally. I love how he rolls. He runs his business just like we do. This guy is in elbows deep, right? And he reaches out and he says, hey, Real Talkers, a lot of them, especially those that aren't signed up with Park Power right now, are going to be opening up their power bills from June and July going, oh, wow. So that's how much it costs to run an air conditioning unit for 2 straight months. He says these expensive power bills present a great opportunity for consumers to look at their bills and consider protecting themselves from price volatility by switching to a fixed rate offering. Park Power is currently offering flexible fixed rates for electricity on 1- and 3-year terms. You get the peace of mind, but you're not locked in. So you want to switch your rate, you want to cancel? No problem. You retain that opportunity and, of course, use the promo code 2021-REALTALK. At parkpower.ca. When you take your business over there, you'll save $70 off your first bill. I chatted with Scott yesterday at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge Jeep. I said, hey, what do you want me to remind Real Talkers? What's something he says, well, first of all, that new Grand Cherokee is on the lot now. Jeep has invested literally billions of dollars into developing this new Grand Cherokee, an absolutely stunning vehicle. What it means is that they've got 2021 Grand Cherokees on the lot ready to roll, and they got to clear space. And so you can get a nicely equipped 2021 Grand Cherokee Laredo right now for $46,900. That's $46,900 from the Jeep specialists, Alberta's best Jeep dealers at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge Jeep. Also, big shout out to the team at Westworld Computers at westworld.ca. You can book right now your service appointment or browse their selection. They'll ship anywhere in Canada. You want to consult with an Apple specialist? Why not trust the independent family-owned business that's been doing it for more than 4 decades online today at westworld.ca. News out of New York today.
Big news.
Would you say this one was inevitable? We've been using the word inevitable today as part of our coverage. Governor Andrew Cuomo says 2 weeks from now, he's resigning.
I don't know if it was inevitable because he was really digging in.
He was.
He was digging in saying, hell no, I'm not going anywhere, despite President Joe Biden urging him to leave office because there was a 168-page report written by 2 independent attorneys, and it detailed allegations against Cuomo of harassing 11 women.
Yeah, this was a story that, and it's got a lot of people talking about a lot of different angles. His brother, Chris, one of the stars on CNN. I mean, the fact, were you paying attention to that, Sam? As you nodding there, a little bit, how Chris was not covering the story, and then it kind of turned out that Chris had been advising. I don't fault him for that. I don't fault him for advising his brother on his response to this. I mean, that's what family members do. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I thought that the way that CNN handled it, I don't know about you. I've name dropped the strategist twice in 1 week now. They better be name dropping Real Talk on their podcast too. But I thought Corey Hogan was bang on it on the most recent episode, or at least the one I heard most recently, saying that CNN, to preserve journalistic integrity, you got to pull Chris Cuomo off the air. At least, you're still getting paid. You're not suspended, but you're sitting on the bench for now because we have to talk about this.
Yeah, you got to. I mean, people tune into Cuomo for sort of that hard punching analysis of the daily news. It's kind of in that evening time slot there, and it's too big of a story to ignore. And I mean, Corey Hogan also went on to talk about in this episode. There was a whole string of right through the pandemic, Chris Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo would be buddying it up on air and talking about the pandemic response and sort of showing this relationship. And I mean, I think that the 3 of us here have worked in various newsrooms, and if somebody in your family was accused of something, you step away from that story and you put another reporter in the spotlight to cover it. That's
or in
what
any
you do.
industry.
Yeah,
in
for sure.
any industry, you've got to absolve yourself from involvement, right?
I think you at least have to acknowledge. Like, I don't necessarily agree that he would have to be pulled off the air.
Oh, come on.
I really don't.
Talking about allegations of sexual harassment involving his brother, you think he's going to do fair interviews?
I don't think that he covers it. I think he stays away from it. Yeah. And I think that he acknowledges the reason why they're staying away from it, because there could be bias.
No way. I got to say, no way.
When you're
saying that is exactly what he did do. He did stay on the air and he did ignore it. No,
I think you don't ignore it. You acknowledge it. You actually like say it outright, directly, frankly. I cannot comment on this, and it's just like when broadcasters say this is one of our sponsors. We're covering the story, but these are one of our sponsors, just for transparency.
Yeah, it's like when we have Bitcoin Well on.
Yeah.
It's Bitcoin Well's like, can you please leave us out of the Andrew Cuomo conversation? But when we talk to Bitcoin Well, when we welcome Adam on, it's he's our go-to when it comes to, or at least one of our go-tos when it comes to crypto. Obviously, there's a relationship there, which we disclose. I think this is different. I think that people look to CNN. Does James Earl Jones still say the most trust? I'm not even going to try it. Never mind.
I kind of want you to try.
No, I can't do it. It's going to be so bad that I'm not even going to. He's got one of the most magnificent voices in human history, but the most trusted name in news. That's been their brand. And I think that you have to, you do your audience a disservice if you simply say we're going to keep our star anchor on and he's just not going to talk about one of the biggest stories in the United States because he's his brother. I think you do it in an appropriate way. We should bring this back to Andrew, not Chris, but in an appropriate way. I think they should have said Chris has done absolutely nothing wrong that we're aware of. Mm-hmm. Even that is kind of a weird way to word it, but they would have someone craft the statement simply to say through no fault of his own, but because of a familial relationship, we can't cover this in the fashion that we know you expect us to approach it. And so he's going to take a timeout and we're going to bring in a substitute host who's absolutely capable, bring in the quote unquote big name, bring in another heavy hitter, and say, for obvious reasons, in the interim, they're going to host in this time slot.
Yeah. Oh, there's my mic. There we go. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's too confusing to have Chris Cuomo come on and do part of the show and then somebody else come on and do part of the show and just like for the clean break, because you guys have probably heard the phrase before, a perception of a conflict of interest is still a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
To the public's eye, Chris Cuomo is compromised and this story needs to be told. And people appointment view that time slot every day for their news. So we can't stick our heads in the sand and say people come to CNN at this hour every day to find out what's happening in the world and ignore one of the biggest stories in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So I would agree. Just bench him, bring on another anchor, move on with this story.
This might be a little bit inside baseball, though. Like we're in the media, so this kind of fascinates us. This is great, but to me, it's like Andrew Cuomo is the story. The allegations
100%.
By 11 women are to be taken seriously.
Yeah,
and he needs. I'm glad that he has resigned.
I don't think that there's any choice. Time. There's no choice. Like, you know what? But it's, you take a look at the most recent. I'm not talking about Joe Biden. I'm talking about 45, that former reality TV show host that occupied the White House for 4 years. And Donald Trump went to prove that if you simply ignore absolute scandal, if you simply ignore it or absolutely tell unbelievable, and I don't mean unbelievable like astounding, I'm talking about literally it is not believable. If you provide unbelievable replies, if you brush things off, if you simply deny them, if you just lie, that ultimately you get out of trouble. That happened for 4 straight years. It happened for 4 straight years. And I wouldn't be surprised if that subconsciously or otherwise influenced Governor Cuomo for the first days or weeks of this scandal.
That's what it seemed like.
Where if some of his advisors were literally like, Governor, we think you can ignore it. Until you're wearing handcuffs, until people are pressing charges, until you're on the front cover of the New York Times in cuffs, maybe we can ride this one out.
Yeah, the news cycle moves fast. Just wait. The next story will break, and people will move on.
Yeah.
Just stick it out. I can definitely see that.
I wonder, Melissa DeRosa resigns yesterday as senior aide to the governor, and I wonder if maybe, once you, I would say that there are more factors at play simply than that, but the optics of, and we see this with politicians, we saw, I don't know why Anthony Weiner comes to mind, but you see others, that whole thing, isn't it? You say that guy's name, people just start snickering. It's like, because we're all 11 years old when it comes to the jokes around Anthony Weiner. But once, people, typically men, that are accused of things like this, like a history, an extended history, you might say habitual or systemic, whatever word you want to use, a prolonged and extended history of, in this case, allegations of sexual harassment or even sexual assault. Once the senior aides start to go, again, optics in many cases are reality. You may say, well, Ms. DeRosa just didn't want to be part of it, or didn't want to, have to perjure herself, or that's a bad example, or whatever the case may be. She just didn't want to. She had lost faith in the pro. She wasn't interested in having her name dragged. She wanted to leave. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter why. Maybe she still might support the governor, or maybe but she's out of here. Doesn't matter. The optics of the senior aides leaving. His announcement, as we've been live here this morning on this Tuesday, on August 10th, his announcement as it's happened is less than 24 hours after Melissa DeRosa leaving. So I wonder if that might have something to do with it. I think it just gets to the point where it's too much. It's too much of a distraction. Obviously, you get to a point where it's dysfunctional, where government cannot function. Part of his address today, he said, given the circumstances, the best way I can help now is if I step aside and let government get back to governing. That New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo says he'll resign in 2 weeks in wake of the sexual harassment scandal.
I think he should have resigned back when long-term care, they were hiding deaths around the long-term care centers and facilities during COVID. So, when you pick your poison, get out.
How many government elected officials, especially high-profile ones, remember a lot of people, thank goodness, a lot of people were like, Cuomo should have sought the Democratic nomination, right? A lot of people wanted him to challenge Joe Biden and everybody else. Can you imagine if he's the president of the United States? Instead, you've got the president of the United States calling for him to resign, and ultimately he did. So, yeah. But you just wonder, at some point, there's such a groundswell that you really are left with absolutely no choice. Boy, have we covered a lot of ground today. I just looked at the clock, and holy smokes, we've been doing this for 131 minutes already. Real talkers have been showing up in spades. I got to say, I intended to read more emails today, and hey, I'm going to read one here to close. But I want to thank everybody that shows up for these conversations, that participates in these conversations. I haven't even looked at our inbox yet, but I guarantee we're going to get a lot of chatter based on what we talked about. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, tell your friends. Maybe smash that like button for us on YouTube. Of course, subscribe to our podcast. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we love and really appreciate those of you that take the time to rate and review our podcast. Yesterday, we informed you all, we let you know that Apple Podcasts has us number one all-time. Number one in all-time downloads for news commentary podcasts in Canada. Just ahead of, we don't know just ahead. They don't show us that, we don't actually know the downloads. We just know that we're number one all time, which is amazing, ahead of Dave Rubin. And somebody reached out to me and said, oh, congratulations on being one ahead of literally the dumbest guy on the planet. I thought, ooh, those are some scathing words. I said, well, thank goodness we're ahead of him and not behind him. But that's because of you, Real Talkers. It's because you tell your friends. It's because you share our content, and we sure appreciate it. I want to wrap with an email. I want to wrap with one. It kind of ties together with a bow this underlying theme that I've alluded to but not talked much about today. But first, I want to remind you that at landscapeedmonton.ca, you can see the amazing work that's done on a daily basis by the team at Eden Landscaping. We're really proud to partner with them. They've been in business, family owned. This is they got a lot of crews and they do some big jobs, but this is a small family owned business, and we can relate to them to a certain degree. I've dealt with Mike and talked to Mike. Sarah, so have you. You know how much pride he takes in the work that they do, and it's evidenced if you take a look at their portfolio on their website. You can see some of the stuff that they've done, really cool stuff that, hey, could fit exactly what you're looking to do, whether it's stunning stonework. They can work in and integrate natural beauty, sort of like geographically specific garden themes, and they can go ultra modern too, as you can see, all at landscapeedmonton.ca. A big shout out to our friends at Eden Landscaping. We got this email to talk@ryanjesperson.com just a short while ago from Johnny. Johnny says, I heard this quote the other day, and the more that I ruminated on it, that's another word that doesn't get enough credit, ruminations.
Marinating.
Yeah, well, it's easy. I haven't had breakfast. I don't have a lunch here with me. The last thing we're going to do is talk about marinating. I made it through the Hatch Chilies conversation okay, but the stomach's going to start rumbling. He says, the more I ruminated on this quote, the more it resonated with me. I thought it was almost a near perfect description of the ideologically driven insanity that has infested all sides of the political spectrum. And I pulled this email. I've got this green folder. Green means go. I've got this green folder here in the studio with about 30 emails printed off that are not time sensitive, ones we could reach in and pull them out at any time and read them. And I went and found Johnny's email right now because of some stuff I'm noticing online. For example, this piece that Danielle Smith wrote. Take it or leave it, love it or loathe it. I see the criticism around the author online, and none of it has anything to do with what she's written. It's just shots at her and her character. Or I see a business in downtown Edmonton, in our home city right now. The business, which is operating out of a neighborhood that's experiencing transformation, has now procured an apartment building. And they're going to be offering rentals to people and broadening their family-owned business. People are piling on them. Piling because now they're landlords. Now they're part of the problem. Just trying to bury this family-owned business. I see chaos all around, and none of it focused on what maybe the Baptiste family lawyer, what Colten Boushie's family lawyer talked about today, the spirit of conversation and sharing and discussion and meeting in the middle. There's none of it. Or is there? I like to think it happens here every single day. So John shares with us, Johnny, this quote. It's an excerpt from Nameless Season 2. It's an audiobook from famed and best-selling author Dean Koontz. I used to read a lot from Dean Koontz. Haven't much recently. Quote, it seems like everyone has taken up many causes each and spends a lot of time shouting to one another about how virtuous they are without noticing that in spite of all this loud righteousness, everything's getting worse. Maybe not in spite of it, but because of it. When so many people take so much pride in their rectitude, there's a perilous shortage of humility. Humble people know that no one can know everything, so they're less likely to saddle up and ride off a cliff just because the prideful have agreed their virtue requires everyone to believe that horses can fly. Humility is the mortar of civilization. Johnny says to me, this is a direct punch to the science-denying, anti-expert freedom fighters on the far right who think being asked to wear a mask in Walmart is step one on a global communist takeover, as well as the privileged, self-congratulatory slacktivists on the far left who feel like they're personally changing the world because they took a break from drinking their fancy $8 coffee to retweet a trendy hashtag. Johnny says the problem with being a centrist is that when you try to explain to either side why their horses can't actually fly, then you're hated by everybody. He says a shout out to all the fellow real talkers out there from Johnny, a hopelessly centrist individual. Thanks for that, Johnny. Humility, the mortar of civilization. We're back at it tomorrow. Looking forward to checking in with probably one of the highest profile health commentators in the country, Andre Picard from the Globe and Mail. Says it's past time for vaccine passports. We'll get into that, plus other news of the day as it develops. Thanks in advance for your correspondence with us, for sharing our content. We'll meet you back here tomorrow, same time, same place. One love, Real Talkers.
The